All right, so what I'd like to do is we have these enemies set up here around our map, and I'd like to kind of create a container, which would be the parent of all of these. So I'm going to go ahead and press uh, my add component here. I can also right click on level 01, add title node, it'll bring it up. And then I'm just going to do 2D, node 2D. And this is sort of an empty component that just has like a transform position for moving around. And I'm going to grab all three or all four of my enemies and just drop them, and now they're a child. So if I type this as enemy and then container, now you could see if I select this parent node, which is my enemy container, and I have move selected, and I move this around, you can see it moves all of my enemies. I can also go in here and move my individual enemies around my map. Let's save that. All right, let's go ahead and open up our player, and let's take a look at doing something a little more exciting, giving us some functionality. And the functionality we're looking for is the creating a movement system for our cop. Now, whenever you create a script, ideally you want to make sure that you're attaching the script at the highest level, because that way we can access the sub-children within it, whether you're creating a main menu for a game or what have you. So I'm going to go ahead and select my player here, and go ahead and let's create a script. So with your highest level selected here, go ahead and click this button here. Now this is a button that attaches a new or existing script to the selected node. And we're going to be using GDScript for this particular lesson. And if you select templates here, you can see there's different types. We'll use the node default template. And then the path, it's going to put it in the scenes folder. We want it to be in the scripts folder. So go ahead and click that folder there and turn on this eye. And let's go up a folder and make sure that we go into scripts. And I'm going to make sure it's say player GD. I'm going to go ahead and hit open, and then we'll create that script. Now, for me, there's a couple ways of doing this. You can see there's actually an open script editor, and they have their own built-in script editor here. We also have the option to add our own, which was cursor, right? So if we go to editor, editor settings, and we scroll down to text editor and we go to external, you can see that we have a path to cursor. So you want to make sure that you click this little option here, you turn on the eye, and that you have cursor set up as your editor. That's the one that we generated the imagery with. And then if you don't see this, you want to make sure that you have use external editor on. Now what you noticed a second ago, and then I paused the video to come back to clear my explanation, is once you have cursor set up, it should automatically open this script up in cursor. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. If it doesn't happen, you can expand your scripts folder and double click player GD, and that'll open cursor for you. So here's cursor with player GD, and what I want to show you is how we can also use the built-in editor inside of Godot, because maybe you want to use cursor later when we get into the AI stuff. But so let's jump back to Godot for a moment. All right, let's go to our script here, and then what you can do is you can essentially grab this and let's see, drop it into this section here. Give it a second to think it out, and actually it looks like we have to set up Godot's editor as our primary scripter to do that. So let's do that. So editor at the top here, editor settings, go down to text editor, external, and then turn this off for use external editor. Let's close that. And I think if I double click it now, yeah, there we go. So it opened it up inside of Godot here, and let's see if we let's see. Let's just go ahead and just right click on output here and then close that dock so we could see more of our editor window here. If you hold the control key and scroll your mouse in, you could zoom in, and I'm just going to give myself as much space as I can so that we could see this. So let's take a look at essentially this chunk of code. So let's start at line 1. And what we have is this line that says extends rigid body 2D. So why does it say that? If you look at your player here, and we select through these different components, this player component at the top was a rigid body 2D. This is what gives us gravity. So by saying extends rigid body 2D, it's giving us access to modify things like gravity scale, mass, all that stuff within the code. If we do not have this line here, we won't be able to modify any of these features. And sometimes you want to turn on gravity. Like if your character is on the floor, maybe you want it to not have gravity where it's pulling him on the floor so that you can move him smoothly. So for example, in Mario Brothers, but if you hit spacebar and the character jumps, you want to turn on gravity so it pulls the character back down to the earth. That's one example of scripting like player movement, that they use in games. And then you see this function ready, called when the node enters the scene tree for the first time. So this is sort of, you put the code down here if you want anything to run the second that the node enters the scene tree, right? The scene tree is when you're pressing play, for example. Here we are in level 1, for example, and let's go to 2D, and I press play. You'll notice there's a local and there's a remote. This is the scene tree. And so the second we press play, any of the information that's underneath there, like player health or whatever we want to set up initially, will go underneath that. And so when we go to remote here, you can see that this is actually the, this is what's going on in our game. So for example, if I select enemy 1 here, you could see that the mass is 1, the gravity is 0, right? But let's go in and, for example, let's stop playing. And let's go to enemy here, and let's turn the gravity scale back to 1 here, okay? Now, if I press play, you'll notice on enemy 1, he's falling, right? If I go to local here, and I have enemy 1 selected, and I go to the transform here, you'll notice there's nothing going on, right? And so let's say we go to remote. Well, if I go inside of here, and I go down to, let's see, we got and then we select enemy 1 here. You can see as we're going through this, you can see that the linear velocity is moving. But inside of our local here, we go to enemy here, you can see that none of this is being altered. So the remote tree, the scene tree here, is actually what's happening inside the game. So let's go ahead and stop that. Let's go back to our script. Now if you come from Unity or Unreal, you're familiar with the term delta time, and this function here is essentially recording using the time since the previous frame, so like we've done in the previous ones. And I think a lot of this explanation will sound a lot less like word salad once we get into programming these. All right, so let's go to our enemy here and let's create another script. This time we're going to name this, make sure that this enemy script is inside of our scripts folder. And so now we have a player and we have an enemy script. We'll leave it same node default. Let's hit create. And we have 2 scripts here. We have a player and we have an enemy script. Okay, so let's take a look at how our how GDScript sort of operates. Now again, if you came from other programming languages, you're probably familiar with the concept of functions. If not, it's okay. We'll get into all that later. So this is essentially a function. And the syntax to me looks a little bit like Python with the tabbing in and stuff. So how do you define a function? Well, the first thing you do is you write the word func, and that means it's a function. Then you have the function name, and then you have some parameters. This is like information you would enter, and then it has a return type with a colon. And then everything after this, you would tab in, and that would make it a member of the function, okay? And so let's just look at scripting this, and I think again, once we get some code and we start practicing this, all this is going to make a lot more sense. All right, so let's save this and let's jump over to our player. Actually, let's go to our scene. And what I'd like to do is we have our enemy in here. Let's go ahead and add our player. So go ahead and create an instance of our player. So now we have our player in the scene, which is here. Just place him over here. Dead in the center, surrounded by these. Well, we'll put him here. We need him in the scene. So here's our player, and we'll move some of these enemies over here. Okay, so here's our player, and with our player selected, let's go into our player script, and let's just go ahead and delete this pass here. So what I want to do is a generic hello world. So I'm going to do print, and we're going to use this as a function. You can see that it kind of auto it'll do some sort of like in Visual Studio, it's called IntelliSense, right, where it'll automatically sort of predict what kind of codes you need. So inside this print function, I'm going to add a set of quotes, and then inside of here, you can write what you want, right? So here's our generic hello world. So let's save that. All right, so let's press play, and let's close this game window out. But you can see here that it printed hello world down here, because this print string is more used for debugging your code, and it says debugging process stopped. So if you wanted to, we would use a UI and a 2D, like a text box, and then you could print hello world to that text box, sort of like a dialogue. So that's essentially your first line of code. And again, I know it's a little generic for those of you who've done programming before to use hello world, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? All right, so let's talk a little bit about variables. You can think of a variable as a container for some sort of object, and many times they have a data type. Well, within Godot or GD script, what you can do is you can sort of create a generic keyword that just says VAR that represents a lot of data types. So what's a data type? Well, you have numbers, you have strings of letters, things like that. So for example, if I do variable and then I do, like number of apples, and this is called camel casing, and I just make that equal to 100. And I use this keyword. This keyword is, like I said, a temporary storage place. I'm going to remove those quotes. I'm going to put number of apples here. Now, what numbers of apples represents is what it contains or what it's holding, and that's this 100 here. So let's save this, and let's go ahead and press play. And what you'll notice down here is you now have 100 printing, right? Now, why is this sort of happening over and over again? Well, let's save this. And the reason for that is this is running in relation to the number of enemies in the scene. Because even though I changed it to players here, I've been scripting the whole time in enemy, and there's 4 enemies, right? So if I want to switch scripts, I click player here. So what I can do is I can actually cut these 2 values and then make sure that I'm in, and save that, and make sure, actually we need to go all the way back to our pass so that we don't have that error. Save that. Let's go to player here, and let's remove this pass, because that's saying, we're not coding anything in there. Now we have 1 player. Now when I press play, you should see 100 one time because we only have 1 police officer in the scene. We should also go to our level here and make sure that we set this character's gravity, let's see, back to 0. And let's save this scene, and let's go back to our script. And let's just make sure that we're editing the player code here. Actually, I think this is a pretty good spot to stop because we're going to be using a bunch of different variable types. And just I wanted to give you a brief overview of scripting, because the way my philosophy is, like, the more we code, the more we build out the game, the more this will make sense. Please do a lot of research on your own. We're going to be building a more advanced game in Godot later, and then we'll dive a little bit more into the programming syntax.